management, or sponsors.
Are you a family caregiver? Are you caregiving for someone who can no longer take care of themselves? Are you overwhelmed? This is Caregiver Solutions Info with Marcia Teal. Marcia will be hosting an hour of true stories and information, tips and updates of the latest research and necessary information in the caregiving field, focusing on you, the family caregiver. An Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert, Marcia has 15 years of hands-on experience at Arden Courts, a leader in assisted living dementia communities here in the U.S. Marcia covers everything you need to know as a family caregiver, especially if you care for a loved one with Alzheimer's disease or other related dementia or chronic illness. If you have a friend or relative that is also a family caregiver, call them now. They won't want to miss a minute. And let them know they can watch on CareGiverSolutions.info. And they can listen on WNN 1470 AM in South Florida or nationally on the iHeartRadio app. Now, sit back, relax, and learn from our host, Marcia Teal, as she brings information to you that may just be the caregiving solution you need.
Well, hi, everyone. This is Caregiver Solutions Info Show. I'm so happy that you could join us today. We have another great show for you. This one is a little different. It involves a police officer. So you might question, well, why would you interview a police officer when you're talking about caregivers? Well, if you think about it, if you're a caregiver and your loved one's at home and they fall in the middle of the night and you can't lift them up, who are you going to call? If you have a spouse who gets out of the house and wanders off and you can't find them, who are you going to call? So I think it's real important for us to talk about these issues, and who better to discuss it and tell us about their experiences with caregivers is a police officer. So thank you again for being with us, because I'm actually at the Largo Arden Courts. We're over near Tampa Clearwater, and I'm on site, and with me today is Officer Joel Quattlebaum. He is a senior services officer with the City of Largo Police Department. And I want to welcome you, Joel. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me this evening. It's a pleasure to be on the air with everybody, be able to offer some insight and some solutions, hopefully, to our caregivers out there in the field.
Well, you're the perfect person to do that, because you're not only a police officer, you're serving in the Marine Corps Reserves, but you also have a special task with the police department, and that is being the problem-oriented policing unit to carry the torch, as they say, of helping Largo's senior citizens. That's a pretty big title.
It is, but it's one that I'm very proud and happy to do, be able to get back in the community and serve, of course, in the Marine Corps on the national level, but also the local Largo level. It's home for me, so it's nice to be able to give back to our local Largo seniors.
Well, that's awesome, and I want to thank you for serving in the Marine Corps, number one, and also thank you for serving as a police officer, because it's not an easy thing to do, and we really appreciate everything that you do, but especially here in Largo, you have the special task of relating to and helping senior citizens. So, first of all, I want to ask you, how long has the Largo Police Department had this specific unit?
We've had our POP team, our Problem-Oriented Policing Unit, since about 2002. It actually started as a grant program from the Department of Justice, the COPS, Community-Oriented Policing Services Grant. And it's grown, since then. Had a lot of successes. Actually, back in 2005, the Senior Services Program had received an award from the state of Florida, the Department of Elder Affairs. So it's been in service for quite a few years now, and definitely it's a well-recognized program within the community here.
Okay, well, I'm glad you're well-recognized, and I'm glad you love it, but what's the actual duty of the problem-oriented policing unit. What kind of things do you handle?
I'm glad you. Honestly, what don't we do is a better question. So, problem-oriented policing unit, sometimes called a COP unit, a community-oriented policing unit. We target specific issues within the community. Everybody kind of has their own specific hat they wear within my team. I, of course, am the senior services officer, so I handle problems throughout Largo involving seniors, whether it be homelessness, financial issues, exploitation, crimes, thefts, etc. We also have a community services officer who does special events such as National Night Out within Largo. We have a new position, the mental health liaison officer, who helps work with calls for service involving mental illness. We also have a person who's part of a task force with the sheriff's office, the home task force involving juveniles. And also we have other officers and a sergeant for the unit who go out and target specific issues within the community throughout the year, whether it might be homelessness or specific criminal activity that gets reported within areas. So if there's like a rash of burglaries or whatnot, or if there's a issue with a lot of homelessness, they try and intervene and offer services as best as possible. So it really gives a chance to get more hands-on within the community. As patrols always going out and doing, the normal calls for service, whether it be a burglary or robbery and traffic crash, the normal calls for a police officer. But this gives the Largo Police Department a chance to be more hands-on and get in the field and target some of the issues that we're encountering within the law enforcement community.
I think that's wonderful. And you're specific to senior citizens. Are you the only person in this unit handling all of these issues?
Yes, I am. And actually, I'm the only senior services officer within the entire county, it's a unique position, unique program. Obviously, it's been in place for a number of years, so it's great to be able to get out there. And over the years, as the position's been in place, the word's gotten out that Largo's got its own specific police officer to help seniors within the community. And sometimes I actually get loaned out, outside of Largo as well, just depending if it's a non-criminal issue. The goal is to try and provide services to our local Largo seniors, but also those that might be a little bit outside of our jurisdiction if it's something where I can connect them to the right resources and get them the help to improve their quality of life.
So as far as you know, this type of unit, it's not really typical of most police departments then, is it?
It's a good question, actually, because a lot of let's go back a number of years here. So the paradigm in law enforcement kind of switched. The pendulum swung from being the black and white cops and robbers type of law enforcement community to being a more community-focused and community-oriented type of field, so to say. So the profession's changed its focus to more community-oriented policing. Most agencies have some type of a community division, whether it be a singular officer or deputy, or it could be a team of officers or deputies that do community services. The nice part about our POP team is that, as problems come up within the community, if there's issues that need to be specifically targeted, they're not just limited to doing presentations and whatnot. They get out in the field, get hands-on, and actually can tackle those problems as they come about. So it's a great resource and asset for the Largo Police Department to be able to, target and focus on specific issues that come up.
And Largo being in Florida, being a great destination for retirees, I imagine you do have a lot of seniors here in the Largo area.
Oh, absolutely. Largo itself is a large community. I mean, right now we're at over 82,000 residents within Largo, and of course, as we say in Florida, our seasons might not change, but the license plates do. So we'll see an influx of people coming down in the wintertime, our snowbirds, and so that increases our population. But recently they just did a population study, and the survey showing about 34% of our population is being seniors. So when you look at the numbers and crunch the statistics, you're looking over 20,000 plus people that are seniors within the Largo community. So a large population, a large segment of our demographics are seniors. So it's something to focus on, absolutely.
Right. So it sounds like you're actually pretty busy doing these problem-oriented solutions. And when you're not doing that, You have other community things that you do out in the community, since you are really community-based and making a great impression upon the whole community.
Exactly. We do, really it's a diverse field as far as what we focus on within the community. I target specific senior crimes, whether it be exploitation, theft, fraud, etc., use of personal identifiable information. But also what I do is I do presentations in the community on fraud avoidance, avoiding scams that target seniors. And we also put on several community programs throughout the entire year, senior empowerment days and senior safety days, etc., focusing on safe mobility and safe driving for seniors and providing community resources. So it's not just the traditional go to the call, solve the problem, and leave. We're actually trying to be a little bit more proactive, which is a great strategy, as it helps us prevent the crime a lot of times instead of just being reactive to it. So that's one of the benefits and honestly one of the best parts of this position that I love.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's not always just about crime, because I know that you assist other agencies and refer to other agencies and nonprofit groups with senior-related calls for service when you know that it's an appropriate referral. So that's something else that you get involved in, is the solution, actually connecting other agencies and nonprofit groups to help this particular senior, no matter what their problem is, correct?
Exactly. Yeah, we have partnerships. One of the programs that we actually do each month is we do a caregiver support group over at the Largo Library, where we tag team with the Alzheimer's Association, Empath Health, Hospice, etc. So it's a different approach to policing in the sense that by opening the conversation and already be talking with residents and caregivers in the field, gives a chance to be able to talk and discuss things before it's a crisis situation. So by partnering with other agencies and nonprofits, it kind of gives us a chance to expand what we can offer. And also, when I do go out for a call for service, depending on what the call may be, make an appropriate referral to get them help and services. So having those contacts is huge, and definitely connecting people to the right resources is important, because you call a phone number, you might call a hotline, and you might be on there for a while. So being able to connect people to people is huge. And really just make sure that connection gets made, because if you leave it to chance, it may or may not happen. So that's one of the good parts about this position, is connecting people.
That's absolutely true what you said. And that being said, we're going to take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, Officer Joel is going to describe a typical day in the life of a senior services officer for the problem-oriented policing unit of Largo Police Department. We'll be right back.
Arden Courts is not just a place to live, it's a place to call home. Residential living combined with quality caregiving. This is the philosophy behind Arden Courts. Communities created exclusively for individuals with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia who would benefit from a safe and structured environment. For additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides, call 888-478-2410 to locate a community nearest you. Inquire about our educational seminars, resource library, or support groups, or simply feel free to ask questions you may have about Alzheimer's and related dementias. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help, because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410 for additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides.
Hi, I'm Mike.
The inability to recognize the obvious often occurs with Alzheimer's, particularly among the family members who care for them. When the time comes for you to decide that someone you love needs more help than you can give, will you be able to recognize it? Don't wait for a crisis to make the decision for you. Talk to us. We know. We understand. We can help. Arden Courts.
.info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
We're back with Caregiver Solutions Info Show, and thank you for joining us, whether you are online on the website caregiversolutions.info and watching us live stream, or joining us from the iHeartRadio app on 1470 AM WNN. We welcome you. And I also welcome Officer Joel Quattlebaum. He is my guest today. He's the Senior Services Officer at the City of Largo Police Department here on the west coast of Florida. So I'm so excited that you're here, Officer Joel, and we've talked a little bit about what the directive of the problem-oriented policing unit is for seniors here in the City of Largo. So if possible, if there is such a thing of a typical day in your life doing this particular job, could you describe for us a typical day?
Absolutely. So the typical day for a police officer is atypical, if anything, in general, even more so within the senior services field. Each day is so different based on the calls for services that come in. One of my goals is, as the senior services officer, is to respond as best as I can in a timely manner to help people. So a lot of times, patrol officers are responding to a call, but if it's something where I might be better equipped to handle the situation based on crisis intervention training or resource availability or just connecting the person to the right contact, I'll try and jump on the call and take it primary so that way I can go out to the residents and just right then, boots on the ground, get them assistance and try and help them out. So the day could go one way, and it could take a hard, sharp left, too. But through the course of the day, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll start off in the morning getting voice messages retrieved. Is through the course of all of our shifts, officers and the citizens alike will make a referral, and they'll send it to my voice message. So I'll collect any referrals that might have come across, whether it be afternoon shift or even sometimes midnights will leave referrals as well. I'll check the emails and see what came across that way. And then just kind of start looking at what's going to need to be first priority and really triage based on each call and each situation, what's going to need to be the target priorities for that day based on what people are requesting, whether it be an information session or just a home visit or a welfare check, or to get out there and provide resources right then and there. So each day is so different, but it's based on the calls for service that we have coming in that day, and also any pre-scheduled trainings or presentations that I might be doing within the community, such as like a fraud avoidance or scam avoidance presentation at whether it could be an assisted living facility or community center. So a lot of times the days just develop as they come about, but in the course of the day, it could change.
Well, your atypical day actually sounds a lot like a caregiver's atypical day, because anything can happen. You have to set priorities. You have to triage what's important at the time. If you have a plan, it might take, like you said, a hard left, and you have to adjust your plan, because in the world of dementia with caregivers, anything can happen at any time, and if you did have a plan, you can pretty much expect to go to plan B, C, D, or E. So I think that what you do really aligns itself for caregivers who are caring for somebody with some type of dementia like Alzheimer's. So knowing that and knowing how you relate to that, I think you're probably one of the best personality and best person to relate to what caregivers go through. So kudos to you for doing this job.
Thank you.
You mentioned that you might jump in on a call of a street officer that might get a call that you might be better equipped to handle. Give me an example of that.
It might be something, and it could be a variety of issues, whether it be a fraud or a scam call that patrol's going out to. Just through my resources and networking, a lot of times I've made contacts with people that can help, or agencies that can help. And a lot of people are unaware of what's out there, such as the National Do Not Call List, the Florida Do Not Call List, as well as the FCC's website and some of the different reporting options there. So the thing with patrol is that they have so many calls that they have to respond to, that by having me respond out with them or in their place, one of the unique components of this position is I'm not on the time clock to go respond to the next traffic crash or to a burglary. So what that means is that I can take needed time to talk with the senior and talk with caregivers and provide them resources and actually make sure they make that connection right then and there, regardless if it takes 30 minutes, if it takes an hour, or if it takes all day. My job is to make sure that connection gets made and that the resources get to them. Because ultimately, I'm here to solve the problem. Mm-hmm.
Yes, yes. It's wonderful. So think back, and maybe it might just be yesterday that this happened, but what could you tell us that was probably the most difficult situation you've encountered with the senior citizen policing unit, and why?
Working with seniors, of course, caregivers know every day is so different, and you try and meet the people that you're working with on their day. And a lot of times, law enforcement, we get the call when it's a state of crisis. I had a call go out where it was an elderly lady who had been, she was in a mobile home park, and she had her daughter living with her. She'd gone to Amscott to make a withdrawal. So she passed a note to the clerk, and on the note it said, "I need help, call the police in 1 hour." So the Amscott clerk had quickly called us. She didn't wait the hour. She called us immediately. It was a very challenging time because the caregiver, she was there on scene. The senior was beside herself crying. This was a case of domestic violence on top of exploitation. So responding out to that scene, it really just took slowing things down, calming things down, and really getting a chance to talk with the senior, find out what had happened. Come to find out, it had been an issue of domestic battery. The daughter had been physically battering the mother, as well as using her funds. So in a chaotic situation, trying to be the calm in the storm is sometimes challenging. But one of the things that I found is I wear a traditional law enforcement policing uniform. The rest of my team wears a gray shirt and the tactical pants. But I found that for seniors, it helps them to relate better with law enforcement if they see the traditional uniform. But one of the things that I've added to my uniform is a pin that we got probably 2 years ago, December, as a gift from the chief to all the officers, is that it's a little angel pin with a law enforcement badge, the LARCO badge on it. So I've put that on my uniform. And at that situation where it was so chaotic and it was a crisis situation, I just had to kneel down and say, "This is what I'm here to be for you. I'm here to be that angel to try and help you right now." Now, whether it's true or not, I don't know. But all I know is that in a very chaotic and crisis time for that individual, it helped calm her down and help her relate to the point where she could talk and give us the vital information we needed to get probable cause to make the arrest in that situation.
So this senior had to reach out to the teller for help because she was desperate and couldn't get away from her abusive daughter. How sad is that?
Yes, and unfortunately it does happen. And what we encounter a lot of times is the underreporting of crimes against seniors. And so that's one of the things that I always try and make aware and get out into the community is call it in, report it, say something. Because one of the biggest issues that I encounter with seniors is isolation. When a senior doesn't have anybody to turn to, nobody to talk to, and they don't report it, they stay in that situation until something changes. In this case here is just a very timely intervention and an action on her behalf to call us and get us involved at that time.
Well, I'm glad she did what she did, because you hear about these stories all the time in the newspaper, especially about caregivers who are taking advantage of, or abusing, neglecting the person with dementia because they think they can, because they can get away with it, or they think they can get away with it. And you hear all these horrible stories all the time, and I'm glad that at least you're there to step in and help diffuse the situation and make the person responsible for their actions. I know that it's very difficult for caregivers, but when a caregiver has thrown upon them this job of taking care of an elderly person, a person with dementia, it's very stressful, and it's very overwhelming sometimes for them, and they resort to violence. They resort to all kinds of things that, even illegal things. And this is one way that we can make people aware of this, to be aware of what caregivers go through and how to get help and how to protect our vulnerable seniors. And thank you for sharing that story. Can you just tell us how it ended? Did the daughter get arrested? Did she go to jail?
Absolutely. Yes. What happened that day was we did end up placing her into custody. She did go to jail. The senior was able to get what we call a no-contact order, or some places refer to as an injunction for domestic violence. And so what had ended up happening was the daughter went to jail. She did end up bailing out, but the court had issued the no-contact order. The daughter, having already been served with the no-contact order and having knowledge of it, she ended up going back to her mother's mobile home, and she ended up getting arrested again for a violation of the no-contact order. What we were able to do is, that's one of the nice parts about this position, is you get a chance to follow up. It's not just to simply make the arrest and hope for the best. You can get out there and follow up with people. So I was able to go out and make sure that the senior got the care and got the resources she needed, because in reality, even though the caregiver might have been in this situation doing something illegal, she was still a resource for the mother. And so that's why the follow-up is important, to make sure that the senior is continuing to get the resources and the care that she needs.
Right, especially when seniors, when seniors are living home, alone, when they don't have a caregiver, when they don't have a good caregiver, all kinds of things can happen. But what's your best success story? I mean, that one sounded to be pretty successful. You rescued the elderly senior, from her abuser. Can you think of something that you're most proud of, or another story that you could tell us about a success?
Absolutely. And that was a case of a caregiver who was doing something illicit. But a lot of times, I tell you, caregivers are such a great resource. And I just want to touch base back on what you were saying before. I see so many times the caregivers being stressed out with having to carry out activities of daily living. That's why getting out there and getting resources to the caregivers too, whether it be a support group or connecting them to resources, is so important to prevent that burnout for them. Because the challenges that I encounter a lot of times are not always with the caregivers, but the isolation for seniors that don't have people in place to help protect them and watch out for their best interests. One of the best success stories that I had was about a year and a half ago now. We'd received a call, some odd activity within one of our mobile home parks. There were some people coming in to this one elderly gentleman's residence regularly, and it was odd. So they were concerned for him, concerned that he was being exploited. This is one of the situations where he didn't have a caregiver. He didn't have anybody really looking out for him aside from his mobile home park community, the neighborhood really looking out and saying, that doesn't look right, so let's call this in. So we responded out, and come to find out, we stumbled upon what had been almost a 5-year fraud going on with this gentleman. It started as one of the door-to-door frozen meat sales. And so what had happened was, years back, one of the frozen meat salesmen had come in and said, hey, would you like to buy these $500 steaks out of my 67 Chevy, beat-up truck? So what had happened was the elderly gentleman had dementia, and it was advanced stage dementia. So this started a history and a pattern of purchasing these steaks, writing checks. What happened was the salesman passed on his info, hey, this is easy money, and he kept giving his information to new people. So over the course of 5 years, this gentleman was out thousands and thousands of dollars, whether it be a $5,000 freezer for his steaks that he was buying, and to the point where he was just writing checks for loan, then to cash, and then no notes whatsoever, just giving money away to these people.
Wow.
And it was advanced dementia. What got me on this one here was that this gentleman was a retired United States Marine Corps gunnery sergeant who served over 20 years during times of war. And he was left home by himself, without family, without friends. He kept to himself, and he was being exploited by these people. So, again, it was the timely intervention of one of the neighbors saying something doesn't look right. Let's get the police involved. We were able to uncover this, and we were able to get prosecution for the scammers that were going out and taking advantage of them.
Wow.
So that was a good success story, and it hit home for me because of the Marine Corps history. This Marine, the gunnery sergeant, who was at home by himself, who needed that help, but he had nobody looking out for him except for when a neighbor said, this is time, something's not right. So we were able to get into place a guardianship for him because of his cognition loss. The court appointed a guardian to him, and we were able to get him placement into an assisted living facility. What ended up happening is the house got sold. Come to find out, he had rats in there. Rat droppings everywhere. He was having a hard time managing his affairs. So it was a very timely intervention, not just for the criminal aspect of it to save his finances and quality of life, but also just because he had nobody to help him out. He was left to really just fend for himself. So it was a good success in the timely intervention, and definitely one of the most memorable calls for service I've had.
That was a good one, a great success. So kudos to you all for doing what you did to help this gentleman and get him all the services that he needed. Thank you for sharing that. We're going to take another quick break, and we'll be right back with Caregiver Solutions Info. Stay tuned.
Feelings of depression, isolation, and frustration are common among persons living with Alzheimer's or related dementias. It's common among those who care for them, too. It takes a lot of patience and courage. It also takes knowing when you can no longer do it alone. At Arden Courts, memory care is all we do. Talk to us. We know. We understand. We can help. Don't let guilt keep you from making the right decision. Visit arden-courts.com. Arden Courts follows equal housing opportunity guidelines. Somewhere at the corner of bewildered and confused is a lost mother, a father, a sibling, a grandparent. Wandering is a common symptom of Alzheimer's or related dementias and can often make those who care for a loved one feel just as lost. If you're looking for a place that's safe and secure, look to Arden Courts. Memory care is all we do. We know, we understand, we can help. To learn more, visit arden-courts.com. Arden Courts follows equal housing opportunity guidelines. Often occurs with Alzheimer's or related dementias, even among their caregivers. When the time comes for you to decide that someone you love needs more help than you can give, will you be able to recognize it? Don't wait for a crisis to make the decision for you. Talk to Arden Courts. Memory care is all we do. We know, we understand, we can help. To learn more, visit arden-courts.com. Arden Courts follows equal housing opportunity guidelines.
I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our national sponsor, Arden Courts Memory Care Community. Arden Courts has 10 communities right here in Florida and about 50 sprinkled across the United States. Arden Courts is a wonderful resource not only for a person with some type of dementia, but also for their caregiver. And today they would like to offer a special resource to the family caregiver. It's a book called The 36-Hour Day. It was written by Dr. Peter Rabins and Nancy Mace, and this is a wonderful resource for caregivers. It explains the differences between the different kinds of dementia, like vascular dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease-related dementia, and more. It also gives all kinds of tips and suggestions for caregivers. It's a great book, and if you don't have it, Arden Courts would like to give it to you for free, just for the asking. And all you have to do is call Arden Courts on their toll-free number, which is 888-478-2410. Again, call Arden Courts at 888-478-2410. Tell them that you heard about the free book, The 36-Hour Day, on the Caregiver Solutions Info Show, and they'll be happy to get your name and address and make sure that they get a copy mailed out to you right away. So my guest today is Officer Joel Quattlebaum. He is a senior services officer with the City of Largo Police Department in Largo, Florida. He is in charge of the problem-oriented policing unit for the Largo senior citizens. And so we're talking about how police can help in the community with the seniors, with care and health caregivers, with the seniors. And it's so interesting, everything that you're telling us, Officer Joel. Thank you again for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So we're talking about some of the situations that you've encountered. And I know caregivers sometimes have no other resource but to call the police when things happen. And for instance, wandering. There's a big risk with people with dementia wandering out of their homes, wandering away from a caregiver when they're out in the community. Maybe they're shopping and the caregiver turns their back and their loved one has disappeared. Have you ever encountered that during your time here at the Largo Police Department?
Absolutely. One of the most memorable cases involving wandering was about a year or so ago. We had an elderly gentleman who had gone out for his normal everyday walk. He didn't come home when he normally did, so his wife had called us saying, I'm concerned. I don't know where he's at. He hasn't come home. So we started at that point getting multiple units out to do a grid search for this gentleman, searching the roadways, searching the parks, searching the golf courses. Come to find out, what had happened was he went for his walk and he ended up getting lost. What he ended up doing is going out to the golf course, and he ended up falling into a ditch, and he was found in the water. He was okay, but he was definitely very soiled and dehydrated. And it took a lot of searching, a lot of units in order to locate him. It was a very memorable case, and it really has led into a new program that we're doing this year for FY19 for Largo. I was able to apply for a grant through the Pinellas Community Foundation in coordination with Imperial Palms for the Safety Net program, otherwise known as Project Lifesaver in some communities. It's a program that helps locate seniors who become lost when they wander. It uses radio frequency technology on a bracelet, so that way law enforcement can very timely and effectively locate somebody who's wandered off and get life-saving measures to them quickly in a hurry. Through the grant, we've actually been able to get the transceiver for our police department, and we've been able to acquire 18 bracelets for those that cannot afford to purchase them on their own. So we'll be offering those out on a loaner basis this year.
That's wonderful, because I know a lot of communities do have the Safety Net program, and they have saved lives, and they have been able to locate people that have wandered away, and it's a wonderful resource for caregivers. I know caregivers always say, well, my husband doesn't wander. My wife, she would never leave the house, and that's true until the first time that they do, and that is really one of the biggest concerns when you have a loved one that you're caring for at home, because unless you have eyes on them 24/7 and they're in a secure environment where they cannot get away from you, they may just wander off when you least expect it. And it's very important for caregivers to be aware of this, because I've talked to a lot of caregivers who say, oh, yeah, I've left my husband at home, while I go to the grocery store. He's good for a couple hours. And that's really dangerous, because people with dementia can, do anything at any time, and it's not safe to leave them alone. They can, wander out. They can turn on the stove. They can, spill water, for instance, trying to get a drink and slip and fall. And then while you're out shopping for a few hours, they're laying, on a tile floor and can't get up. So it's real important for people to be aware of this and to know to ask about the Safety Net program wherever you may live. So that is obviously a big concern. So thank you for sharing that, Officer Joel.
Absolutely. And one of the things, too, that I like to recommend for caregivers and family members is that if you or your loved one has Alzheimer's or dementia, one of the things that you can do is reach out to your local law enforcement. Most agencies utilize what we call a CAD, a computer-aided dispatch system, and each residence, each physical address has a spot for call notes. If you have a senior in your home who might wander, it would be a good idea to call your local law enforcement and ask if they could put a call note in for your residence with your emergency contact info. That way, if law enforcement gets dispatched, they can locate and call you quickly. As well as with the Florida driver's licenses, you can have an emergency contact entered through the DHSMV, the Department of Highway Safety Motor Vehicles. So if law enforcement encounters your loved one who might have wandered off, if they use his driver's license and swipe it in the police cruiser, it'll pull up your emergency contact info through the David system, is what we call it.
Mm-hmm. That's a great idea, great advice. We talked earlier about getting involved other agencies and nonprofit groups as appropriate to work with the seniors that you encounter in specific situations. What are some of the examples of some of these agencies? I imagine one of them might be the Alzheimer's Association.
Absolutely. Alzheimer's Association, like I said, we've partnered with them. Each month we offer a caregiver support group at our local Largo library in coordination with the Alzheimer's Association and Empath Health, which is the local interface for the Suncoast Hospice here in Pinellas County. So situations like that where we tag team, we kind of provide services in one spot. But we also do a Senior Empowerment Day, like I mentioned earlier on in the conversation. Each year we put on one or a couple different Senior Empowerment Days throughout the community where we can bring local nonprofits and community agencies, kind of a one-stop shop for seniors. So it's a great opportunity for those that don't travel too far. They can come to one spot instead of being held on a phone line for hours on end. They can ask person-to-person questions and find out about local community services as well. So it's a great way to partner with some of the local agencies.
Right. What about the scenario where a caregiver fears for, say, her life because her husband who has Alzheimer's is threatening her and picked up a knife and he's angry and he's going to go after her and she calls the police? What would happen in a case like that?
That's a great question because that does happen. Kind of going back to what I was talking about before, too, if you have a loved one within the residence who has Alzheimer's or dementia or some type of mental illness, it wouldn't be a bad idea to call the local law enforcement and have a note placed on that residence just so that way law enforcement's aware of the situation and the surrounding circumstances when we respond out. Because a case where, anybody who arms themselves with a knife or a taser or whatever it may be, we're going to be responding to lights and sirens, what we call code traffic, as quickly as possible to get to that situation because obviously there's a threat to life. So we're going to be responding as fast as possible. But one of the things that our dispatch does is while we're en route, they'll be letting us know some of the premise notes or call history. So if dispatch is telling us, by the way, there's a premise note, the person you're responding to has Alzheimer's, there's a history of calls for service here, reference Alzheimer's or dementia, the response might be altered a little bit. So we're not necessarily going code to somebody who has criminal intent, to kill, but it might be a situation where we need to assess for what we have in Florida as the Baker Act, where situations become so significant that there's a threat to self or others. And a lot of times the person will be taken into custody, protective custody under the Baker Act law to have mental evaluation and medication management undergone.
Right, and that's so important for you to have that heads up, to know that there's a situation where dementia is involved, because otherwise, if you didn't know, the officers might go in and arrest this person, and that's probably one of the worst things that can happen to a person with dementia is to get arrested and go be put in a police cell somewhere and not be understood and understand what's happening to him, and they not understand what he's going through, and it just would make the situation worse than doing it the way you say, with going in and intervening with the appropriate response and getting him the help that he needs by going to the local maybe hospital. A lot of them have geriatric psych units where people with dementia can go and they can evaluate them and stabilize them and get them the treatment that they need.
Absolutely, exactly. And that's the goal, is to get them the appropriate care and treatment that they need. Because a situation like that, it's a crisis situation for both the individual with the dementia and Alzheimer's as well as the caregiver and family. I mean, that's a very upsetting time and a very critical situation, critical incident. So we just want to make sure we intervene as appropriately as possible and timely as possible and get them the care and resources they need to, ultimately improve their quality of life is our goal.
Exactly. That's exactly what it's about. The quality of life of the person with dementia, but in this case, maybe this caregiver need a little education and going to support groups and learning how to communicate better with a person with dementia so not to escalate a problem because, especially spouses that have been married for 50, 60 years, they're used to being interacting with their loved one in the same way. But when, Alzheimer's is involved, you got to change your ways because the same dance that you did when you were married and through your life is not going to be the same dance you do with a person with Alzheimer's. And one of the biggest things caregivers have a hard time grasping is that this isn't really your husband anymore. He's been changed, and, it's not him, it's the disease that is what you're seeing now. And that's really hard for them to understand and then learn the appropriate ways to deal with that. So in this case, caregiver support, caregiver education would be something that you would encourage also.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things that I'd like to advertise too. Whenever I do a community presentation or if I'm going out as part of a patrol's call for service, when I go to a home, I like to make sure people have my contact info and tell them, if you have a question, ask. It's a lot of times I hear too often, actually, that they don't want to call the police, they don't want to bother the police. I always like to tell people and remind them, the police are here to be bothered. We're here for you, and especially me. If there's anything that I can help answer or guide, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of reaction. So if there's any questions in mind, glad to help ahead of time, to avoid maybe a critical incident like that. Whether it might be referring to respite care or getting in-home services for that caregiver, because it's a stressful job. It really is. Caregivers go through a lot, and definitely hats off to every caregiver out there who, day in and day out, takes care of a loved one, because it is a big responsibility.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And you and the caregivers both have big responsibilities. So again, similarities there. We're going to take our last commercial break. When we come back, we'll finish talking to Largo Police Department's Officer Joel Quattlebaum, who's just awesome and helping seniors. So we'll be right back.
The inability to recognize the obvious often occurs with Alzheimer's, particularly among the family members who care for them. When the time comes for you to decide that someone you love needs more help than you can give, will you be able to recognize it? Don't wait for a crisis to make the decision for you. Talk to us. We know. We understand. We can help. Arden Courts. Wandering is a common problem for people with Alzheimer's or related dementias. It's also a problem for family members who care for them. Keeping them safe and secure means never letting your guard down. And even though deep down you know it's time, it hurts to have to ask for help. But it could hurt them even more if you didn't. We know. We understand. We can help. Arden Courts. Feelings of depression, isolation, and frustration are common among persons living with Alzheimer's or related dementias. It's common among those who care for them, too. It takes a lot of patience and courage. It also takes knowing when you can no longer do it alone. At Arden Courts, memory care is all we do. Talk to us. We know. We understand. We can help. Don't let guilt keep you from making the right decision. Visit arden-courts.com. Arden Courts follows equal housing opportunity guidelines.
This has been such a great discussion today about how you help solve problems in the community for Largo senior citizens. But I would imagine that with all the successes and all of the wonderful things that you do, there's still some challenges. What's your biggest challenge in what you do?
One of the biggest challenges that I encounter is honestly that there's just not enough hours in the day. When you're looking
I
at
think
the
we all can
statistics-
relate to that.
Oh, absolutely. And there's so many people that need help and need assistance. Just trying to get to everybody in the course of the day can be a challenge in and of itself. If I could duplicate myself, that'd probably be one of my best wishes, is to get more hours in the day to help people get in the field. But one of the things that I see, one of the things that I see is just with caregivers, the challenge is, the isolation component, getting out into the community and breaking that barrier of isolation. connecting people to resources and connecting them to community agencies. You know, if you break through that wall, half the challenge is already done.
So, was your training with caregivers something formal, learning about dementia, or did you kind of learn it on the job?
That's a great question. Actually, it's been formal and informal. I myself have found myself in a caregiver situation with my own family, whether it be MS or cancer issues. I think anybody finds themselves in a caregiver situation at some point. One of the things I like to ask whenever I'm doing a presentation is, who here is married? Because regardless of whether it's Alzheimer's, dementia, any other illness, as a caregiver, it could be your spouse, it could be a grandparent taking care of grandchildren. People are in caregiver situations every single day. And just connecting people to the right resources, making sure they have the help available to them is huge. And that's a huge component of it. For me, I've taken a lot of training classes through the state of Florida's the Department of Justice and the State Attorney General's office. They actually have a crime prevention training institute where I've been certified as a certified victim advocate. Also doing trainings on crime prevention within the home, residential security, etc. So that way I can make recommendations to caregivers on how best to secure the residents. Because the reality is, if you have a vulnerable adult in the home, that in itself, you have valuable people in the home. You want to harden it as best you can, so that way people who might be trying to scam or defraud you or your loved ones have a challenge to try and get into your home. So the training classes, it kind of has enabled me to make security recommendations and give guidance as far as connecting people to the right resources and some things that they can do for crime prevention, just to make sure that they're a hard target, so that, quite honestly, the bad people can't get to them.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there are a lot of bad people out there. And you're talking about fraud and scams, and I actually had an elderly relative of mine who called me and said, I got this letter from somebody in another country, and they said that, there's some money out there that hasn't been collected, and they want to blah, blah, blah. As soon as she started telling me, I knew it was a scam. But here she is. She's in her 80s, probably late 80s, and got this letter and really gave it some, credence that this could possibly be something. But luckily she contacted me and asked me what I thought, so I could tell her that throw it away, it's a scam.
Oh, absolutely.
So I know there's
that day in, day out.
Yeah, you get it day in and day out. So what should people do if they're not sure? What are some of the scams lately that you've seen, and what should people do if they encounter some of these things?
It goes back to the isolation barrier. The more people that you have contact with and that you interact with that are knowledgeable of you and your situation, the better in that instance, only because if you're being scammed, chances are your neighbors are too. And spreading that word is vital. We see the IRS scams, especially around tax season, that there's a warrant for your arrest, that the IRS is going to come pick you up on the warrant. It might be a Microsoft scam, your computer's broken or has a virus and we need to fix it. It could be something Medicare, Medicaid fraud related. We just need you to read us your Social Security number to confirm your identity. One of the more significant ones is the grandparent scam, where it's a scammer who's calling and pretending to be a grandchild or son or daughter that's in distress, whether it be incarcerated or in trouble, and they need you to send money to them immediately. But one of the most common themes within these scams that we encounter is that it's a high-pressure sales tactic strategy. They're trying to pressure the person to send money now, make it quick, and they're pressuring them into quick access funds, whether it be a Green Dot card or going to a local Walmart or getting iTunes gift cards. I've had seniors say, I don't even know what an iTunes gift card is, but I knew I had to purchase one in order to get my grandson safely back home to me.
Oh, no. So you've had seniors that did that.
I've had seniors give away $50,000 just because the person sounded nice on the phone and would talk to them. The affinity scams is what we call those. It's where, you have an isolated senior and you have the scammer who does nothing. They work hard at not working. Their sole purpose is to get money from people. And so through talking on the phone for that senior who's isolated, that might be their only phone contact throughout the entire day or entire week. I see a lot of times, seniors are here and families up north, whether that be Massachusetts, New York, wherever it may be, and they might not talk with their family all that often. So having that open conversation with family, with friends, is huge.
Yeah.
So
well, thank you for
definitely
sharing that. Very, very scary, very important to be aware of that. So we only have a minute left. So Officer Joel, in this last minute, what advice would you give seniors living at home and caring for a spouse with dementia? Any last tips that you could give us?
The biggest tip I could say is just have a plan. Have a plan, whether it be having a file of life on your refrigerator, having a will, having a power of attorney, having healthcare surrogates picked out. Have a plan and make sure your plan is known with your family caregivers and loved ones. That way your wishes are abided by in the time of need. Have that conversation now so that if something happens, you're already talking, the conversation's already going. That's one of the best things I could recommend is have a plan.
That's a great recommendation. Have a plan, even if you don't have to use it now or ever, but have that plan and don't wait for that crisis when, unfortunately, you have to call the police. And if they do have to call the police, I hope they get one as nice and knowledgeable and caring and compassionate as you, Officer Joel. Thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
And thank you all for listening. We'll be back same time, same place next week with another great show for Caregiver Solutions Info. In the meantime, give someone a hug because they need it and so do you. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Solutions with Marcia Teal. Join us next week as Marcia, who has 15 years of Alzheimer's disease and dementia care experience, brings you more needed information to help with the care of your loved one. This show can be seen again on CareGiverSolutions.info, and questions can be left on the site, which may be used on the program to help others. See you next week for more Caregiver Solutions.
The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were strictly those of its host, guests,